It was one of those days when the sky couldn't make up its mind. Morning had started with a pale sun struggling through wisps of cloud, but by afternoon, the heavens had darkened to a brooding gray. I remember checking my weather app before leaving the apartment, seeing that little thundercloud icon, but deciding against bringing an umbrella anyway. Maybe part of me wanted to tempt fate. Or maybe I was just being stubborn, thinking the rain would hold off until I made it home. Either way, I was wrong. I had spent most of the day at the university library, buried in research for my thesis on urban architecture. There's something about the way cities transform in the rain that has always fascinated me. The way concrete and glass take on new dimensions when slick with water, how the rhythm of life changes when people hurry rather than stroll. I'd been so absorbed in my work that I barely noticed the gradual dimming of light through the tall library windows, the subtle shift in atmosphere as the pressure dropped and the storm approached. By the time I packed up my laptop and notebooks, the first fat raindrops were already hitting the pavement outside. I stood in the library doorway, watching people scurry past with umbrellas unfurling like sudden blooms of black flowers. The rain wasn't heavy yet, just a warning of what was to come. I decided to make a dash for the cafe across the street, Magnolia's, where I could wait out the worst of it. The timing couldn't have been worse. I was halfway across the street when the sky opened up completely. By the time I reached the cafe's striped awning, I was already soaked, my hair plastered to my forehead, my thin jacket clinging uncomfortably to my shoulders. And that's when I saw him, standing there with the same slightly stunned expression I probably wore myself. He had clearly been caught in the same sudden downpour, though he seemed to find the humor in it more readily than I did. "Looks like we had the same brilliant idea of not checking the forecast," he said, running a hand through his damp hair. His smile was immediate and warm, the kind that reaches the eyes and makes you want to smile back despite yourself. And I did smile back, feeling a strange flutter of recognition even though I was certain we'd never met before. "I actually did check," I admitted, shaking water from my sleeves. "I just didn't believe it. Stubborn that way, I guess." He laughed, and the sound of it seemed to cut through the drumming of the rain. "A skeptic. I like that. I'm the opposite, eternally optimistic that the weather will improve, despite all evidence to the contrary." We stood there under the awning, watching as the rain intensified, turning the street into a river of reflections. The cafe behind us was packed, every table taken, people pressed against the windows watching the storm. We introduced ourselves in that casual way strangers do when thrown together by circumstance. His name was Elias, and he was a musician, a pianist who composed scores for independent films. There was something about the way he spoke, with such passion about creating emotional landscapes through sound, that made me forget about the rain and the cold and my damp clothes. Time seemed to slow down as we talked. The conversation flowed effortlessly from music to architecture, from films to books, from childhood memories of rainstorms to dreams for the future. It's rare to find that kind of immediate connection with someone, that sense that you're speaking the same language even when discussing things you've never talked about before. I found myself noticing small details about him. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, how he gestured with his hands when explaining something he cared about, the slight accent I couldn't quite place that colored certain words. After about 20 minutes, it became clear that the rain wasn't going to let up anytime soon. In fact, the sky had darkened further, and distant rumbles of thunder suggested the storm was only getting started. The cafe remained impossibly crowded, and we were both getting chilled standing outside in damp clothes. "I live about 15 minutes from here," Elias said, gesturing down the street. "And I actually do have an umbrella." He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a compact black umbrella. "It's not very big, but it's better than nothing. Would you like to share? We could walk to my place, dry off, and I could make some tea. Or coffee, if you prefer." In any other circumstance, with any other person, I might have declined. Going to a stranger's apartment wasn't something I normally did. But there was something about Elias that felt trustworthy, something in his eyes that told me this wasn't a line he used to lure people home. And perhaps the rain had washed away some of my usual caution, or maybe it was the prospect of continuing our conversation somewhere warm and dry. "Tea sounds perfect," I said, "as long as it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," he replied, opening the umbrella with a snap. Consider it a rescue mission for two victims of meteorological optimism. The umbrella was indeed small, barely big enough for one person, let alone two. We had to stand close together, our shoulders touching, my arm occasionally brushing against his as we navigated the rain-slicked sidewalks. I was acutely aware of his presence, the subtle scent of his cologne mixing with the fresh smell of rain, the warmth radiating from his body despite his damp clothes, the careful way he held the umbrella to ensure I was covered even if it meant his outside shoulder got wet. As we walked, the city transformed around us. The rain created a kind of intimacy, isolating us in our small dry circle amid the downpour. The sounds of traffic were muffled, and other pedestrians became blurred figures hurrying past. It felt as though we were moving through a different version of the city, one that existed only for us in that moment. I've always loved the rain, Elias said as we waited at a crosswalk. My grandmother used to say that rain washes away the boundaries between people. Something about being vulnerable to the same elements makes strangers into companions. Your grandmother sounds wise, I replied, watching how the raindrops caught the light of the traffic signal, turning red and green as they fell. Though I'm not sure everyone caught in this downpour is feeling quite so philosophical about it. He laughed again, that same warm sound that seemed to create a bubble around us. True, most people are probably just cursing their wet socks right now. The thunder was getting closer, the time between lightning and thunder shrinking as the storm moved overhead. Each flash illuminated the city in stark white light, revealing details normally hidden. The expressions on people's faces in apartment windows, the texture of the stone buildings, the patterns of water running down the sides of buildings. Then darkness would return, making those glimpses seem almost dreamlike. As we turned onto a quieter residential street lined with brownstones, Elias began telling me about his childhood in a small coastal town, where storms came in from the sea with little warning. We had this game, he explained, where we'd count the seconds between lightning and thunder to know how far away the storm was. 5 seconds meant 1 mile. My sister and I would sit on the covered porch and watch the count get smaller and smaller as the storm approached. Did you ever get scared? I asked, finding myself leaning closer to hear him over the rain. Sometimes, he admitted. But there was excitement in the fear too. That feeling that you're witnessing something powerful, but you're safe at the same time. He glanced at me, our faces close under the umbrella. Do you know what I mean? I didn't know. In fact, I was feeling something similar at that very moment. A mixture of exhilaration and uncertainty as I walked through the rain with this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all. There was a charge in the air that wasn't just from the storm. We were about halfway to his apartment when the heavens truly opened. The rain became a solid wall of water, and the wind picked up, threatening to turn the umbrella inside out. Elias guided us toward the shelter of a building's overhang, a small alcove in front of what looked like an old bookstore, closed for the day, its windows dark. Maybe we should wait here until it calms down a bit, he suggested, closing the umbrella and shaking off the excess water. The space was small, forcing us to stand even closer than we had been under the umbrella. I could see droplets of rain clinging to his eyelashes, the way his shirt clung to his shoulders, the rise and fall of his chest as he caught his breath. The world around us seemed to fade away as we stood there, protected from the downpour, but still very much part of the storm. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, illuminating his face in sharp detail. The curve of his lips, the intensity in his eyes as they met mine. 1, 2, 3 seconds passed before the thunder crashed directly overhead, so loud it seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath our feet. And in that moment, as the thunder rolled around us, Elias leaned forward and kissed me. His lips were warm despite the chill in the air, gentle but certain. The shock of it, both the thunder and the kiss, sent a current through me that had nothing to do with the lightning. My hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the damp fabric of his shirt, the solidity of him beneath it. The kiss deepened as the thunder faded, becoming something more than just a spontaneous reaction to the storm. There was intention in it, a question and an answer all at once. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb gently brushing my cheek, and I felt myself melting into the gesture, all thoughts of the rain and cold forgotten. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, the world seemed to have shifted somehow. The rain continued to pour, but it felt different now, like it was creating a space just for us, A moment out of time where nothing existed beyond this small alcove and the connection that had sparked between us. I've been wanting to do that since you smiled at me under the cafe awning, Elias admitted, his voice low and slightly rough. Was that okay? I nodded, unable to find words for a moment. More than okay. I finally managed. Perfect timing, actually. He smiled, that same warm smile that had first drawn me in. I've always had a good sense of timing. Comes with being a musician, I guess. Another flash of lightning, another roll of thunder, but it seemed more distant now. Or perhaps I was simply less aware of it. All I could focus on was Elias, the way his eyes held mine, the lingering warmth of his lips, the feeling that something significant had just happened. We should probably keep going before we both catch pneumonia, he said eventually, though he made no move to step away. Unless you've changed your mind about that, T? Definitely haven't changed my mind, I assured him, though I think my expectations for this afternoon have shifted somewhat. He laughed softly, reaching for the umbrella again. Mine too, in the best possible way. We stepped back out into the rain, which had eased slightly, though the sky remained dark and threatening. This time, when we huddled together under the umbrella, there was a new awareness between us, an electricity that had nothing to do with the storm and everything to do with the kiss we'd shared. His arm slipped around my waist, holding me close as we navigated the wet sidewalks, and I leaned into him, no longer concerned about the propriety of such closeness with someone I'd just met. The remaining walk to his apartment passed in a blur of rain-slicked streets and stolen glances. We talked less now, but the silence was comfortable, filled with the patter of rain on the umbrella and the occasional rumble of thunder moving away from us. Sometimes our eyes would meet, and we'd share a smile that acknowledged what had happened, what might still happen. Elias lived in a converted warehouse building, the kind with large windows and exposed brick walls. His apartment was on the third floor, a spacious open-plan space that reflected his artistic nature. A baby grand piano dominated one corner, bookshelves lined the walls, and various musical instruments were displayed like sculptures throughout the room. One wall was almost entirely windows, offering a dramatic view of the storm-darkened city. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, disappearing into what I assumed was the bathroom and returning with fluffy towels. "Here, dry off a bit. I'll put the kettle on." I took the towel gratefully, patting my hair and face dry while watching him move around the kitchen area. There was an easy grace to his movements, a confidence that was attractive without being showy. He filled an electric kettle and set it to boil, then pulled 2 mugs from a cabinet. "So," he said, turning back to me with a slightly shy smile that contrasted with the boldness of his earlier kiss. "This isn't exactly how I imagined my day going when I woke up this morning." "Me neither," I admitted, moving closer to the kitchen island that separated us. "But I'm not complaining." "Neither am I." He held my gaze for a moment, then gestured to a collection of tea tins. "I have pretty much every variety of tea known to humanity. My mother sends me obscure blends from her travels. Any preferences?" We settled on a spiced chai, and while the tea steeped, Elias found me a dry sweater to change into. It was too big, of course, hanging off my shoulders and reaching almost to my knees, but it was warm and soft and smelled faintly of him, a mix of laundry detergent and something uniquely his own. The rain continued to fall outside the large windows, creating rivulets that distorted the view of the city beyond. We sat on his couch, mugs of steaming tea in hand, angled toward each other, close but not touching. There was a new tension between us now, an awareness of possibilities. "So," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug, "do you often kiss strangers during thunderstorms, or am I special?" He laughed, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "Definitely special. In fact, I'm not usually so forward. There was just something about you, and the storm, and that moment." He trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. "I hope I didn't overstep." "You didn't," I assured him. "It was unexpected, but in the best way possible. Like the storm itself." "That's a good way to put it." He took a sip of his tea, watching me over the rim of his mug. "There's something about storms that makes everything feel more intense, more immediate. Like the normal rules don't apply." "Is that what this is?" I asked, feeling suddenly vulnerable. "A storm exception? Something that wouldn't happen on a sunny day?" Elias set his mug down and moved closer to me on the couch. "No," he said seriously. The storm might have accelerated things, but I would have wanted to meet you, to know you, rain or shine. His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. Though I have to admit, sharing an umbrella with you was a particular pleasure. I smiled, feeling the warmth of his hand in mine, the weight of his words. For me too. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease, the spaces between thunder growing longer, the rain lessening from a downpour to a steady patter. But inside, between us, something was still building, a different kind of storm, one made of glances and touches and unspoken possibilities. We talked for hours as the afternoon faded into evening. Elias played the piano for me, his fingers moving over the keys with the same gentle confidence they had shown when touching my face. I told him about my thesis, my fascination with how weather shapes urban experiences, and he listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly engaged. At some point, the rain stopped completely, though neither of us immediately noticed. We were too absorbed in each other, in the connection that had formed so unexpectedly between us. When I finally looked out the window, I saw that the clouds had parted enough to allow the setting sun to break through, casting the wet city in a golden glow. "Look," I said, pointing to the window. The storms passed. Elias followed my gaze, then looked back at me with a smile that made my heart skip. "Not all storms," he said softly, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. "Some are just beginning." And as the sun broke through the clouds outside, illuminating the rain-washed city in a new light, Elias kissed me again, not with the sudden passion of our first kiss during the thunder, but with a slow, deliberate tenderness that promised this wasn't just a storm exception. This was something that could weather any forecast. We made plans to meet again the next day, and the day after that. As I finally prepared to leave, borrowing his umbrella just in case. Though the sky was now clear, there was a certainty between us that this chance encounter had changed something fundamental for both of us. "I'll never hear thunder the same way again," he said as he walked me to the door. "Neither will I," I replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him one more time. As I walked home through the freshly washed streets, the city seemed different somehow, brighter, more vivid, full of new possibilities. The air had that clean, electric quality that only comes after a storm, when everything has been washed clean and the world feels renewed. I thought about how a single decision, the choice not to bring an umbrella despite the forecast, had led to this unexpected connection. How standing under that small circle of shelter with Elias had created a different kind of shelter, an emotional one that felt surprisingly sturdy for something so new. The kiss when thunder hit had been just the beginning. Like the storm itself, it had cleared the air, washed away pretenses, and revealed something beautiful and unexpected. And as I reached my own apartment, still wearing his too big sweater, I realized I was smiling, had been smiling the whole way home. Sometimes, it takes a storm to show you what's been missing from clear skies. Sometimes, getting caught in the rain is exactly where you're meant to be. And sometimes, sharing an umbrella with a stranger can lead to sharing much more, a connection, a kiss, a beginning. The forecast for tomorrow was clear and sunny, but I found myself hoping, just a little bit, for rain. Total under scorch or underscore count, 18,573.